Yeah, everything is going very well. We stay in the same gym. Like last couple of fights, we stay in New Jersey and training in Makhachev MMA. It's very nice gym. I have too many my brothers and friends and sparring partner with me. Almost all team is here. We're training together. Habib is here, Javier is here, and we're training every day very hard to be ready.
Every generation of mixed martial arts is defined by a handful of fighters who leave behind more than championship belts. They leave behind influence. They change how coaches build game plans. They change how young fighters train. And sometimes, they change the sport itself. For many fans and analysts, Islam Makhachev has become one of those fighters. At first glance, his dominance appears easy to explain. Elite grappling, relentless pressure, championship victories. But from an analytical perspective, those achievements are only part of the story, because Islam's greatest contribution to modern MMA may not be the opponents he defeated. It may be the new standard he helped reinforce. For years, the sport rewarded specialists. Elite strikers could become champions. Elite wrestlers could dominate divisions. Exceptional submission artists could build championship careers. Today, that's becoming increasingly difficult. Modern champions are expected to blend every aspect of mixed martial arts into one complete system, and few fighters demonstrate that evolution better than Islam Makhachev. He doesn't simply wrestle, he uses striking to create grappling opportunities. He uses grappling to open striking exchanges. Every phase of his game supports the next. That level of integration has forced opponents to prepare differently. Coaches have adjusted training methods, young fighters study transitions rather than isolated techniques, and championship level MMA continues moving toward complete versatility instead of specialization. Of course, Islam isn't solely responsible for that evolution. The sport has been moving in this direction for years, but his success has become one of its clearest examples. To understand why so many people believe Islam Makhachev has changed MMA forever, it's necessary to look beyond the title defenses, because the real story begins long before he became UFC champion, inside a small region that has produced some of the most technically complete fighters the sport has ever seen. Long before Islam Makhachev became UFC lightweight champion, his greatest advantage was already being built, not in the bright lights of Las Vegas, not inside a UFC performance institute, but in the mountains of Dagestan. For decades, the region has developed a unique combat culture where wrestling, grappling, discipline, and relentless repetition are introduced at an early age. Rather than treating these skills as separate disciplines, they're often practiced as parts of one continuous system. From an analytical perspective, that's what made Islam's development different. He didn't learn wrestling first and striking later. He learned how every part of fighting connects. Early in his career, his background in combat sambo gave him an exceptional understanding of balance, leverage, and transitions. Instead of viewing a fight as a series of separate exchanges, he approached it as a sequence where every movement could create the next opportunity. A defended punch could become a body lock. A failed takedown could lead to clinch control. A scramble could become a submission attempt. Very little was wasted. Another important influence was the environment around him. Training alongside elite athletes every day meant every session demanded high standards. Competition wasn't reserved for fight night. It existed inside the gym, where constant repetition sharpened technique and decision making. That culture also emphasized patience. Winning wasn't about forcing spectacular moments. It was about making fewer mistakes than the opponent. By the time Islam entered the UFC, those habits had already become second nature. He wasn't simply relying on athletic ability. He was applying a system that had been refined over years of disciplined training, and once that system met the highest level of mixed martial arts, the rest of the lightweight division began to realize they weren't facing a traditional wrestler. They were facing one of the sport's most complete competitors. One of the biggest misconceptions about Islam Makhachev is that his success comes from wrestling alone. It doesn't. From an analytical perspective, wrestling may be the foundation of his game, but it is no longer the entire structure. Early in his UFC career, many opponents built their strategies around one assumption: stop the takedown and the fight becomes manageable. Over time, that assumption became increasingly difficult to defend. Islam's striking continued to evolve. His jab became more effective at controlling distance. His kicking game improved. His counter-striking became more composed. Rather than using punches simply to set up takedowns, he began winning exchanges on the feet against elite competition. That development changed everything. Now opponents faced a dilemma. If they focused too heavily on defending the takedown, they left themselves vulnerable to clean strikes. If they committed to striking, they risked being taken down and controlled. From a strategic standpoint, that's exactly where Islam wanted the fight to be. Every defensive choice created another offensive opportunity. Another underrated part of his game is efficiency. He rarely wastes energy chasing techniques that aren't available. If a takedown isn't there, he resets. If an opponent escapes, he calmly transitions to another position. There's very little panic, very little unnecessary movement. Everything serves a purpose. That level of discipline reflects years of training, but it also reflects exceptional fight IQ. Islam isn't trying to win every second of the fight. He's trying to consistently make the highest percentage decisions until the opportunity to take control appears. And once he establishes that control, very few fighters have been able to reverse it. By this stage of his career, Islam Makhachev was no longer just one of the UFC's best wrestlers. He had become something far more difficult to prepare for. A fighter who could seamlessly blend striking, wrestling, grappling, and patience into one complete system. And that system would soon begin influencing the rest of the sport. This is where the story becomes bigger than Islam Makhachev himself. Champions don't always change a sport because they invent something new. Sometimes they change it by proving which ideas work best at the highest level. From an analytical perspective, Islam didn't create chain wrestling, positional control, or pressure-based grappling. Those concepts have existed in MMA for years. What he did was demonstrate how devastating they can be when combined with elite striking, disciplined decision-making, and exceptional conditioning. That combination has become one of the defining models of modern MMA. As Islam's success grew, more fighters and coaches began emphasizing transitions instead of isolated techniques. Training sessions increasingly focused on blending skills together. A striking exchange wasn't viewed as the end of an action. It became the beginning of a takedown. A defended takedown became a clinch battle. A clinch battle became back control. Every phase connected to the next. That's exactly how Islam approaches fighting. Another noticeable shift has been the growing importance of efficiency. Earlier eras often rewarded relentless aggression and high-volume offense. Today's elite fighters are increasingly focused on control, managing distance, limiting unnecessary risks, forcing opponents into mistakes rather than chasing spectacular moments. Islam embodies that philosophy. He rarely fights emotionally, he rarely rushes. Instead, he patiently builds advantages until the fight begins unfolding on his terms. Perhaps that's the biggest influence he's had. Young fighters aren't simply trying to copy his techniques, they're trying to copy his process, the patience, the discipline, the seamless connection between striking and grappling. Those qualities are becoming more common across elite gyms around the world, and while no single fighter can reshape an entire sport alone, Islam Makhachev has become one of the clearest examples of where modern MMA is heading. When people analyze Islam Makhachev, they usually focus on his technique, his wrestling, his submissions, his striking, but one of the biggest reasons for his success can't be measured with statistics. It's his mindset. From an analytical perspective, Islam approaches fighting like a chess match rather than a brawl. Every exchange has a purpose. Every movement creates another possibility. He rarely throws strikes simply to entertain the crowd. He throws them to collect information, to force reactions, to create openings that may not appear until a minute later. That patience separates him from many elite fighters. In modern MMA, the pressure to produce exciting moments can tempt athletes into unnecessary risks. Islam rarely falls into that trap. If an opportunity isn't there, he waits. If a position isn't secure, he improves it. If an opponent escapes, he calmly begins building another sequence instead of chasing a reckless finish. That level of discipline is difficult to maintain over a 5-round championship fight, yet it has become one of the defining characteristics of his career. Another overlooked strength is his emotional control. Championship fights often become unpredictable because emotions influence decision-making. A frustrated fighter starts forcing attacks. A confident fighter becomes careless. Islam does neither. Whether he's winning a round or facing resistance, his approach remains remarkably consistent. That consistency makes him incredibly difficult to read. Opponents can't rely on frustration changing his strategy. They can't wait for him to abandon the game plan, because he almost never does. Perhaps that's why his performances often appear so controlled. They're not based on reacting emotionally to the fight, they're based on trusting a system that has been refined over years of elite competition. And in a sport where one poor decision can cost everything, that unwavering discipline may be one of Islam Makhachev's greatest competitive advantages. Every dominant champion leaves behind more than victories. They leave behind influence. And in the case of Islam Makhachev, that influence may shape the next generation of mixed martial artists. From an analytical perspective, one of the clearest trends in modern MMA is the decline of the true specialist. Years ago, a fighter could could reach the top by relying primarily on one elite skill. An exceptional striker could overwhelm opponents on the feet. An elite wrestler could control fights with takedowns alone. Today, that formula is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Championship-level competition demands versatility. Fighters are expected to strike, wrestle, grapple, defend submissions, escape bad positions, and make smart decisions under constant pressure. Islam represents that evolution. He doesn't rely on one weapon. He combines multiple disciplines into a system where every technique supports the next. That approach is becoming the blueprint many young fighters are trying to follow. Across gyms around the world, coaches are placing greater emphasis on transitions rather than isolated techniques. Training sessions increasingly focus on connecting striking to wrestling, wrestling to control, and control to submissions, all while maintaining composure and conserving energy. Those principles have become hallmarks of Islam's style. Of course, he isn't the only champion contributing to this shift. The sport has evolved through the influence of many great fighters across different eras, but Islam's success has reinforced an important lesson. At the highest level, being exceptional in one area is no longer enough. The future belongs to fighters who can seamlessly blend every phase of mixed martial arts into one complete system, and that's why Islam's impact extends beyond title defenses and championship belts. His greatest legacy may be the example he has set for the next generation, a generation that now understands winning in modern MMA isn't about mastering one discipline, it's about mastering all of them together. When people look back on the careers of the greatest champions, they're often remembered for more than titles. They're remembered for influence, not because they won, but because they changed the way the sport was understood. From an analytical perspective, Islam Makhachev belongs in that conversation, not because he single-handedly reinvented mixed martial arts, no champion does, but because his success has reinforced the direction in which elite MMA has been evolving. His career demonstrates that modern champions can no longer rely on one extraordinary skill. Power alone isn't enough. Wrestling alone isn't enough. Striking alone isn't enough. At the highest level, the margin between victory and defeat has become too small. The fighters who thrive are the ones who connect every phase of the sport into a single complete system. Islam has become one of the clearest examples of that philosophy. His striking creates opportunities for wrestling. His wrestling creates opportunities for submissions. His positional control conserves energy. His patience limits mistakes. Every element supports the next. Perhaps that's the most important lesson his career offers. Dominance isn't created through spectacular moments alone. It's built through consistency, discipline, preparation, and thousands of small decisions that most fans never notice. Whether future champions adopt his exact style isn't the real question. The real question is whether they embrace the principles behind it. Efficiency, versatility, adaptability. Those qualities are becoming the new standard for championship-level MMA. That's why Islam Makhachev's legacy may ultimately extend far beyond the lightweight division. Long after the belts change hands and new champions emerge, the influence of his approach is likely to remain. Because the greatest champions don't simply win their era, they leave behind ideas that shape the next one. And in that sense, Islam Makhachev hasn't just been one of the best fighters of his generation, he has become one of the defining examples of what modern mixed martial arts looks like at its highest level.